When my story got attention, I was hoping that we would see true commitment to protecting the rights of women and girls, that it was not just receiving awards and applause, that it was about us stepping up to say that this should never happen to another girl, this should never happen to women in any part of the world where their right to education, their right to work, their right to public appearance and political participation are suddenly taken away from them. And that's why I am so focused now on pushing for systematic protection for women and girls in the international law. And when I came across this documentary, I immediately said yes, and I wanted to be a part of it because it helps us center the voices of Afghan women and girls and help us see exactly what is happening on the ground. You don't get to see much of that in the news, even if it gets a little bit of coverage anyway. And I think it's so critical for us that we don't put the topic of Afghanistan aside and we look at the reality that Afghan women are facing, which is very much a systematic oppression on the ground.
Sahra, tell us what life is like for a girl or a woman in Afghanistan now, because it goes beyond the right to education, doesn't it?
Yeah, of course. It's a start from education, the beginning. Then, of course, women didn't allow to go to back to their job, and then things getting worse and worse every day. So imagine born in this situation as a girl, how it look like. It means you're born without having any dream for the future, and not education, not job, not even having dream about what is your plan for the future. And I think it's really not something that we just take it as a normal.
And you're focusing on Afghanistan in this film, but how concerned are you about women's rights in other countries? Amnesty International, for example, is highlighting this week the case of a female student who they say was arrested after stripping to her underwear. They say that was in protest at harassment over the country's strict dress code. What do you make of that case? And are you concerned about women's rights in Iran?
I'm concerned about women's rights everywhere, from Iran to Afghanistan to even the UK and the US. And, as somebody who began her journey fighting for her right to education, I do worry, how many rights of women are at risk. And it means we need more unity, more solidarity, be with each other, and realize that when it's women's rights somewhere else, that it should be a concern for us as well. It should not be siloed, it should not be put aside. So we need to care about Afghan women, we need to care about each other.
And you, of course, grew up in Pakistan and were targeted by the Taliban there when you spoke out about education in your local area. The Taliban in Afghanistan is a different organisation, but do the stories told in this film resonate for you?
The stories that we see in this documentary are in repeat. This has happened in Afghanistan 20 years before the Taliban took over. They are the same Taliban who are retaking control and doing even worse things than they were doing back in 1996, 1997. And the same group has factions and affiliated groups that were there in Pakistan as well. What the Taliban are doing, they have criminalized all of these human rights for women. That if you go out, if you get your education, if you go to work, you are punished. They have criminalized it. They're exploiting their power. But on the other hand, if we look at the international system, there is no way in which the Afghan women can be fully protected. And that's why Afghan women activists want to call it a gender apartheid. And they're asking countries to put that system in place so that the Taliban could be held accountable.
We're talking in the days after the American election. Do you have a message for the new president-elect Donald Trump? What should the US be doing for Afghanistan?
I think it's too early to say much about what the policy would be and what the response would be. But all I can say is that we need leaders to be brave enough and to step up, to stand with Afghan women and girls and protect their rights. And I hope that we can ensure that Afghan girls get their right to education and Afghan women get their right to work and protection. We need to step up and be brave enough to support them, and then also question our leaders, to hold them to account, that when they say that they are committed to gender equality and all of that, what do they mean? How do they prove that? in the international role that they play.
Does America have an extra responsibility given the criticism over the nature of its withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan?
I think when we look at who's more responsible, I think that is a much longer conversation, because it's not just about what happened in the past 3 years, but what has been happening in the past 3 to 4 decades. And I think those who have played a role in it must be questioned, must be held accountable. But I would say that progress has been very fragile, and we have not put much effort into protecting the gains that we have made. And you know, for me, when I think about women's rights, I think we need to see more commitment to make sure that we do not lose these opportunities. And just looking at the case of Afghanistan, we see how how vulnerable women are, that an extremist government or an extremist group can take over and they can just take away all of these rights from women. And we cannot live in a world like that. I think Afghanistan is the most extreme example of how women can be oppressed even in this day and age. And I do want to highlight that we should not allow any excuse, whether that is of culture or religion or something else, to be used in this. And I don't think we should be saying that if it's treated as a domestic issue and then we can look away. It comes to human rights, and in human rights there should be no compromise, and it should be protected at the international level. Of course, there are like a dozen of Muslim countries, and like none of those Muslim countries are banning women from work or education. So the Taliban are just merely excusing themselves.